Hey everyone, today we are going to go through the different organelles of the cell, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at based on the ed puzzles and everything like that so far. But we're going to go through and break down what each of them are, what they do. But you've probably also noticed you have a project coming up. That's going to be your final project for biology class this semester. It's going to count as your final exam grade, final project, however you want to look at it. In this project, you're going to do an analogy where you tell me all about the parts of the cell, but you relate it to something else. In this presentation that I'm about to show you, I'm going to use a restaurant as my analogy to give you an idea of what to do. Your analogy can be a place, a city, a person, a thing, anything you can come up with. You just can't choose my restaurant analogy because that's what I'm using for this example here. But as we go and I talk about organelles, I'll give you my analogy as well so that you can get an idea of what we're talking about. So we're going to look at cells. We're going to look at these questions here. What are the structures of a typical eukaryotic cell and what are their functions? What are the similarities and differences between plant and animal cells? We're going to see that they have many of the same organelles, but plants have a few different ones that animal cells don't have. But let's go ahead and get started here. First, we're going to look at the cytoplasm and the cytoskeleton. So the environment enclosed by the plasma membrane is a semi-fluid material called the cytoplasm. So if you look at this picture, it's just the fluid. It's just the space between all the organelles. In prokaryotes, all the chemical processes of the cells take place directly in the cytoplasm, and in eukaryotes, it takes place within organelles. But again, it's this fluid space between everything inside of its cell. So in a restaurant, which is the analogy I'm going to use, the cytoplasm is basically the dining room. It's because the dining room allows for customers and the staff to move around. There's space to sit the same way that the cytoplasm allows molecules to move around. It's the space where molecules move. So in a restaurant, the cytoplasm would be the dining room itself. The cytoskeleton is a supporting network of long, thin protein fibers that form a framework for the cell and provide an anchor for the organelles. You have microtubules, if you look at this picture, which are long, hollow protein cylinders that form a rigid skeleton for the cell and assist in moving substances within the cell. Microfilaments are thin protein threads that help give the cell shape and enable the part of the entire cell move. So in a restaurant or any building, really, the cytoskeleton would be the frame that holds the whole building up, like what's inside the walls, what holds everything up. Pillars, pieces of wood, whatever the case may be, it's just what's holding everything up. Next, we have the nucleus, and here's a picture here. Follow along, and it's going to show you every part. But the nucleus, it contains most of the cell's DNA, which stores information used to make proteins that determine a cell's growth, function, and reproduction. It's surrounded by a double membrane that we call a nuclear envelope. Okay, so in a restaurant setting, the nucleus is going to be like the manager. It's we're considering the manager the nucleus because it controls the rest of the staff in the same way that the nucleus controls genetic information, and it's the control center of the cell. So in a restaurant, the nucleus is the manager. Okay, we have ribosomes. Ribosomes are organelles that manufacture proteins. They're not membrane bound like other organelles, and they are produced inside the nucleus in this tiny structure called the nucleolus. So ribosomes are like the chefs in the restaurant. Because the chefs produce food for the customers of the restaurant the same way that the ribosomes link amino acids to form proteins in the cell. Okay. Next, we have the endoplasmic reticulum. There's like a rough endoplasmic reticulum and a smooth endoplasmic reticulum. The difference is whether they're covered or not. We'll get to that soon. The endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER, is a membrane system of folded sacs and interconnected channels that serve as the site for protein and lipid synthesis. So in a restaurant, the endoplasmic reticulum, that's like the kitchen. It's like the kitchen because the kitchen's where the food is produced and it's cooked in the same way that the endoplasmic reticulum helps assemble the proteins. So the ER is like a kitchen in our analogy here. Next, we have the Golgi apparatus. That's this structure down here. The Golgi apparatus is a flattened stack of membranes that modifies, sorts, and packages proteins. Proteins are packaged into sacs that we call vesicles, which can fuse to the plasma membrane and release the proteins into the environment. So the Golgi apparatus inside of a restaurant is going to be, it's going to be kind of like the waiters. It's like the waiters because the waiters put the order in for a dish and then they receive it and then they carry it from the kitchen and deliver it to the customer, the same way that the Golgi apparatus processes, sorts, and delivers proteins in the cell. So in a restaurant, the Golgi apparatus would be the waiters. Okay, next we have vacuoles. Vacuoles are basically membrane-bound sacs used for temporary storage. They store food, enzymes, or waste, and they're only found in plant cells. You are not going to see this in an animal cell. So it's kind of like in the restaurant, and this will be like the refrigerator. It's like the fridge because it stores food to be used later, the same way that the vacuole stores materials like water and salt and all that that's needed by the cell. So in a restaurant, the vacuole would be like the fridge. Okay, next we have lysosomes. Lysosomes are vesicles that contain substances that digest excess or worn out organelles and food particles. And they also digest bacteria or viruses that may invade the cell. So lysosomes in a restaurant are going to be basically the janitor, the person that cleans the restaurant. It's like the janitor because it cleans up messes, throws away trash, the same way that a lysosome is going to rid the cell of unwanted material. So in a restaurant, it's going to be the janitor or the person cleaning up. Next, we have centrioles. Centrioles are the organelles made of microtubules that function during cell division, and they're located in the cytoplasm. So centrioles don't even really get used unless cell division is going to happen. So the centrioles in a restaurant would only matter if the restaurant was going to create a new branch. So if you have one store in our town, but you want to replicate your store in another town, the centrioles would prepare for division. They would come in and prepare to make a new restaurant. So again, they wouldn't even be, just like in the cell, centrioles aren't even used unless it's time for cell division. In a restaurant, they wouldn't be used unless you're going to make a new restaurant. So they would be like the people forming a new chain of your same restaurant. The mitochondria. The mitochondria converts fuel particles into usable energy. They have an outer membrane and a highly folded inner membrane that provides surface area for breaking the bonds in sugar molecules. That's the structure right here. In our restaurant analogy, the mitochondria is kind of like the stove or the oven. It's like that because the stove and the oven produces energy for food to be cooked and baked the same way that the mitochondria supplies energy for the cell to be used. So in the restaurant, the oven has that energy to cook your food. In the cell, the mitochondria has the energy that is necessary for the cell to function. Okay, next we have chloroplasts. This is another one of those organelles that are only in plant cells. So Plant cells and some other eukaryotes contain chloroplasts, which capture light and convert it into chemical energy in a process that we call photosynthesis. I'm sure you've heard of photosynthesis before. We're going to get into that before too long. They are composed of multiple small discs called thylakoids, which contain the light-capturing pigment known as chlorophyll. Basically, chloroplasts convert sunlight into energy for the plant cell. Now, in a restaurant, these would be like if your building had some solar panels on the restaurant, because the solar panels convert the sun's energy into energy that can be used by all the electrical appliances in the restaurant, the same way that the chloroplast carries out photosynthesis by converting sunlight into usable energy that we call ATP. We'll get into that down the road, or glucose that the plant cell is going to use. But yeah, so on our restaurant, chloroplasts would be the same as if we had some solar panels. And then we have the cell wall. Again, this is another thing that only plant cells are going to have. So a cell wall is a thick, rigid mesh of fibers that surrounds the outside of the plasma membrane. It protects the cell and gives it structure. And it's made from a carbohydrate that we call cellulose. So in our restaurant, the cell wall would just be straight up the walls of the restaurant. It protects the restaurant from the environment, from outside conditions. It gives a shape to the restaurant the same way that a cell wall protects, gives structure and shape to a plant cell. So in our restaurant, the cell wall would just be the walls of the restaurant. We also have cilia and flagella. I'm not going to worry too much about these in your analogy. However, we're going to talk about what they are. So when you get to your analogy project, you don't have to worry about cilia and flagella, but we are going to go over them real quick. Cilia are these short little projections that look like hairs. If you look around this picture here, the little tiny pokey out hairs, they move in tandem like the oars on a rowboat. And then flagella are longer and less numerous than cilia, and they move like a whip-like motion. Both of them are made of microtubules. And what's important to remember is these structures would be to help cells move. And these are typically what you're going to find on a single-celled organism or a unicellular organism. But the cilia and the flagella, their major function is to make things move. And again, you're not going to find these on your analogy project, but they do exist, and I wanted to show them to you. Okay, now when we compare cells, we're going to see that there are some features that plant cells have that animal cells do not. Chloroplasts, chlorophyll, vacuoles, and cell walls. These are things you're going to see in plant cells only. Everything else is in both plant and animal cells. So keep those two distinctions in mind. If you see chloroplasts or vacuoles or a cell wall, you are looking at a plant cell. The other organelles not mentioned on this short list can be seen in any cell, plant or animal. So keep those things in mind. All right, guys, so take this information, go work on the cell analogy project. You're going to have this week and the majority of next week, because I want you guys to do a good job. I want you to complete this assignment, and you're going to do it thoroughly.